Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the ZvZ tutorial mini-series. In the previous video we talked a lot about the importance of the tanks and supports in the Zerg, so it's only natural we go ahead and go in depth about the support role in today's video. Now, I hope you take away the general points in this video and then not just blindly follow the builds and specific tips related to those builds. We're going to follow a similar format to that of the previous video. We'll talk about the builds and supports in general and then take a look at some clips and analyze them. Hopefully, we'll learn something. Let's get right into it. Supports in general, as the name would imply, support the Zerg in some way. We already covered this partly in the previous video where tanks perform a major role in disengaging and peeling, which is one way to support your group, so to speak, but there are other ways as well. Here we have the 5 most common ZvZ support weapons. Let's go over them one by one and explain what their purpose is in a Zerg. First, we have the Locus, we have the Icicle, Occult, Enigmatic, and Evensong. First, we got the Locus. The Locus is without a doubt one of the most, if not the most important weapons in a ZvZ. It's super versatile and incredibly impactful. A good Locus player can single-handedly save your Zerg or help you wipe an enemy clump. The Void creates an area which removes all positive effects from enemies and removes all negative effects from allies, while also increases the resistances of allies by 90. While channeling, the area grows from 2 meter up to 8 meter radius, and collapses once the channeling ends. The channel can't be interrupted and lasts for 5 seconds. You drop it on a friendly clump, you drop it on an enemy clump, you drop it on a choke when your Zerg or the enemy Zerg is pushing through it. It's just insane, really, but how exactly do you play as Locus? So usually in ZvZs, you'll be appointed to be either defensive or offensive Locus, and as the names would imply, when you play as defensive Locus, you are on the lookout to use your E on your allies when the enemies are engaging in order to save them. This requires some experience in both ZvZ knowledge and positioning in order to be the most effective because you are a reactive role, so you need to be quick to react and use your cleanse, use your E, save your allies. Now, as an offensive Locus, your role is slightly easier in my opinion. You engage along with the tanks and drop your E wherever your party is engaging, kind of as if you were a DPS. You purge enemy defensives, like for example Night Helmets. Yeah, Locus is very important as you can tell, and it's really nice to use whenever there's chokes, whether it's you or the enemy that's pushing through a choke, it's really strong. One important thing to remember is that your E cannot be interrupted. This is really nice, but keep in mind you can still take damage, so you need to be on point with your positioning. We will be looking at a lot of clips of Locus gameplay near the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. We're going to go into more detail exactly how that plays out. Next, we got the Icicle staff, and basically it's just a big AoE slow. We saw this in the last video, how effective this can be, but basically your main job is to slow an enemy engages. Drop the E as enemies are running in, use your Knight Armor, preferably in a choke if possible, Frost Nova on the tanks and melees as they try to run in, and then just spin in circles until you have cooldowns again. That's what 99% of Icicle gameplay is, so it's easy to pick up, and then it's just practice from there. A good Icicle player can single-handedly stop an enemy flank, which we'll see in the clips later on, so it is an important role. Next is the Occult. The main job of an Occult is to increase the mobility of your Zerg, make it easier to engage faster and cover more ground, or just use it to run away. You're also usually responsible for beaming one of your DPS. This is usually decided on in advance. You can pick your favorite DPS while you're massing and let them know that you're going to beam them. I recommend putting them at the top of your party list or however you want to have it so it's easy to select them the fastest. Try to not lose sight of them during the ZvZ as people do clump up and it might be hard to click directly on them, so that's why selecting them from the party list is usually easier. I mean, it's hard to do wrong with an Occult. When an engage is called, just drop your E in the direction where you're going. It's pretty simple. For the beaming part, some basic knowledge of different DPS roles is nice to have as well. So, for example, if your partner is Brimstone or Mistpiercer, I mean, it's pretty telegraphed when they're going to drop their damage, but otherwise, if you're not sure, you can always look at their buffs and debuffs, and when you see like the Scholar Robe pop, then it's pretty obvious they're going to use your E right afterwards. Preferably you want to have that max stack beforehand, but as you're running in, usually drop your carpet, run the full distance, and then just start beaming your DPS. But for example, if your DPS is playing Weeping, Just kidding. Nobody plays that anymore. I mean, yeah, it's important to know roughly how your partner DPS works if you're going to beam them, but in general, it's pretty simple. Drop your Occult, run in, and then shield and beam your DPS. It's pretty simple. Next up is Enigmatic. This one is more frequent during castle and terry fights, but is still seen during open world fights. When attacking a castle, you'll usually drop this on your tanks or hammering the gates, and if you're defending, you'll usually drop it on your DPS as they're dropping over the wall. But in general, the beauty of playing support is how versatile these roles are, so always look out for good opportunities to save your allies. If your Zerg is pushing through a choke, you generally want to use your E on them if you're expecting the enemies to counter engage. Last and kind of least, we got Evensong. I'm personally not the biggest fan of this, but it kind of deserves to be on the list still. I think for the most part it gets outclassed by the other options. I feel like Icicle just does a better job in most situations and doesn't rely on enemies making mistakes. At least for massive scale fights, Icicle has the benefit of being a big AoE and not being reliant on enemies to clump. Also, it has the zone control option, and most competent Zergs will just immediately cleanse and get rid of the Evensong effect. So I think it's decent for smaller ZvZ fights and just small to medium scale PvP in general, but it just gets outclassed for any big ZvZs. Now that said though, it's still worth mentioning. So how do you play this exactly? The most important job you have is to drop your E on enemy clumps to try and help secure kills, or drop it on enemies as they're engaging, and hopefully saving your allies. Now, Icicle isn't as good for securing kills on enemies, so that's where Evensong really shines to try and secure the kills and try to drop it on clumps, slow enemies. It's a very big slow, so it has its times where it really shines and it's better than Icicle, but it's pretty specific and can easily be countered. And actually, let me very quickly mention Damnation, which, let's face it, it is a support role. You debuff your opponent's resistances and improve the clap potential of your Zerg. But how do you play it? It's very simple actually. You pop your hunter shoes, use your knight helmet, use your scholar robe, E and W on the enemy clump, throw a sickle in there if you feel confident, and then just walk out. Very simple, but it is important that you are very early to drop your E because you want to have the enemies pierced before your DPS reaches and throws their big damage there. So you want to go in fast, preferably along with your tanks, and be early to drop your E. So we covered all the common ZvZ support options as of the time of me making this video. Hopefully you're starting to get an idea of the general support role. We got the peeling, setting up, disengaging, protecting, buffing, and so on. In spirit of keeping this guide general though, keep in mind these 5 weapons aren't the only support weapons that exist or will ever exist. Stuff will get nerfed, reworked, buffed, and in a year from now or so, the meta could be entirely different. What if SBI reworks the Locus? What if they do something like buff Life Curse and it becomes a viable ZvZ support options that you can throw on a melee or a tank? I'm pretty sure I remember some people using Black Monk in ZvZs not too long ago. Now, not the worst. What about a Bedrock Mace that's built purely for disengaging? What about Oath Keepers? Could play a similar role to Enigmatic in the future. I mean, hell, some people already play Oath Keepers in ZvZs now. I don't really think it's that good, but Staff of Balance recently got buffed and is now the top meta pick in 5v5 crystals. What if it gets buffed again or reworked and becomes viable in ZvZs? All of these are just random options I threw out there, but it's not impossible one of these becomes a staple ZvZ support weapon. But a few things to keep in mind is always the other contenders. Ask yourself, what role or niche does this fill? Is it a supportive role, a disengaged tool? Are there better options that do this better? Is it better than Icicle, for example? How impactful is it? How does this fit into the current ZvZ meta? And I think that one's really important especially important because ZvZ metas change. Some of you might recall pre-nerf Damnation. No, that was fun. Well, I don't think the ZvZ format will change much. The specifics will, so always stay up to date with the nerfs, buffs, and changes to stay ahead of your opponents. One recent example of this was when Spectre Jackets were broken. Those were fun, like 2 or 3 days, I think. every Zerg was 90% Spectre Jackets and Bloodletters during that time, so expecting tons of melees would definitely be something you adjust your party composition and playstyle around. And also, you would naturally run more of whatever's broken, so you'd also have more Spectre Jackets in your party. Now, this is just general meta discussion about ZvZs, but I think it's useful to take a look and think about what could be the next big thing and how good it could be in ZvZs. And most importantly, it helps you think about why it's useful and strong in ZvZs. And the compositions are a really important deal, so always look into that as well. And most importantly, it helps you think about why it's useful and strong in ZvZs. And a good way to think about it is to think about how it fits into a normal ZvZ comp, and knowing the meta of like normal and typical ZvZ weapons and tank rolls helps with that. Enough chit chat. I guess we'll go on to the part that's of most value for people, and that's reviewing clips and hopefully learning a thing or two. Here we have a clip of an enemy Zerg trying to push through this double choke here. A very good disengage here, keeping the enemy stuck on the choke, slowed, and many people knocked by the knight armors. You'll see that some people always manage to squeeze through, but that's fine, that will happen. Here we get an Enigmatic, and this is the perfect example of why Enigmatic is useful, especially during castle sieges. You can see that one ally still manages to die, but just imagine what would have happened if there was no Enigmatic at all. Here's another Enigmatic, but this time it's a bad one. Reaction time isn't as good, should have been a lot faster to use the E on your allies there, didn't get as much value out of it, but decent positioning. Next we got the Occult. Here we have 3 back-to-back engages with beaming a Misspiercer. Less reactive gameplay obviously, but still an Occult is definitely something you should consider adding to your Zerg's arsenal. Even if it's not castle fights, it's still really good. Here we have a few defensive Locus clips where, as a defensive Locus, you're basically on the lookout for friendly clumps that are about to get deleted. Personally, some of these I think the reaction time is a little too slow. As soon as the Camlin is there, you should already be casting your E before they get pulled in my opinion, but very good examples of how to press your E, I guess. I would disagree with the Knight Armor choice. I think a Judy Armor or Demon Armor is a lot better, but that's what the guy's running in the clip. Next, we got 2 back-to-back very solid offensive Locus clips. You can even see an Evensong in there being thrown at the enemy clump. Honestly, if you have enough Locus player in your Zerg and you have a certain assigned role, the role itself is not that difficult. If you're assigned, for example, as defensive cleanse in your backline, it's super brain dead to just sit, and when the enemy is engaging, just be quick to press your E on your allies. It's usually very easy to see where the enemies are engaging, even before you see any Camlin, but if you want to be sure and if you're not that experienced, then you can just easily wait until you see the Camlin Vendetta to appear, and then boom, you use your Judy armor, use your Locus, or if you're using Demon armor, then you can use your Demon armor afterwards. Shield and cleanse if someone gets stuck in a snare charge or something, and there you go. It's honestly not that difficult, but it does require some practice and some basic knowledge of ZvZs. And the same goes for if you're playing as offensive Locus as well. And it's even easier in my opinion, although you have to be more careful about your positioning because you're going to be engaging with the tanks. You often run in basically as if you were a tank to drop on the enemy clump. You purge the knight helmets, you purge any buffs, you make it easier for your allies to drop on that clump to secure the kills. I think this clip here showcases how important it is to be patient sometimes. Just wait, be patient, don't drop your E randomly, see where the best place is to drop your E. And here we have another solid defensive locus. As soon as you see the Camlin come in, use your E on your allied clump. Don't hesitate, just drop it on your allies. And that would be it for this video. I do hope it was educational, and I hope you take away the general guidelines from this, paying attention to what the enemy Zerg is doing and being fast to react depending on what your role is. The builds are once again pretty flexible and depend on what you already have in your Zerg, so don't get too caught up in that. Thanks for watching, and look forward to the next one, which I'm planning to drop next week on Sunday as well, which will be about healing. My main role, believe it or not, and the one I started with, and still the only weapon role I'm full spec in, even though I have 150 mil fame credits laying around. Okay, we're getting off topic. I do hope you enjoyed it though. Leave a rating and a comment if you have any feedback, and I'll see you next time.